They say the collapse of the Roman Empire was the work of savage hordes, thunderous armies at the gates. But the truth? It was far quieter, invisible, deadly. Picture this, a mighty empire, undefeated on the battlefield, unmatched at sea, gleaming in marble and gold. Yet underneath it all, something rotten. A silver coin in every citizen's hand that promised value, but every year became lighter. First a fraction of purity lost, then half, then almost nothing. The real invasion happened from within. No crashing swords, no shouting legions, just broken trust in the money that built an empire. Coins turned into shells of value. Soldiers demanded more for less. Trade slowed. The engine of Rome stumbled. And while the walls still stood tall, the foundation, the confidence in the currency, had cracked. What appears as history's distant ruin is actually a warning, ringing in the cash registers of today. But here's what really happened. It began with a silver coin. In the early decades of the empire, the denarius was almost pure silver, roughly 4.5 grams with a purity of 95 to 98%. For citizens of Rome, merchants, legionaries, farmers, this tiny coin was a guarantee. My money holds value. It symbolized stability, might, and trust in the empire. Then came the fissure. Around AD 64, under the reign of Nero, a decision was made. Reduce the silver content. The weight dropped to approximately 3.41 grams, and purity slipped to approximately 93% or less. Why? The empire was spending, rebuilding Rome after the Great Fire, funding extravagant games, financing wars at the far edge of its borders. The treasury cried out for cash, so the state resorted to the easiest option: mint more coins from the same silver supply. At first, it felt like a win. More money flooded the markets. Temples rose, gladiatorial spectacles dazzled the crowd. Troops were paid, Rome's machine kept humming, and the people hardly noticed the subtle change. But look closer. What felt like abundance was really erosion. When you reduce the silver in a coin but keep its face value the same, you've pulled a silent bait and switch on everyone who accepted it. Trust in the coin, once rock solid, began to crack. And so the empire's strength, once minted in silver and trust, started to fade. Not because warriors broke the gates, but because the money behind the gates lost faith. Prices crept upward. Soldiers grumbled. Someone noticed. Their pay bought less. Barley cost more. Merchants preferred old coins, hoarded them. The economy shifted. This was the first crack in the foundation, but the real crisis was just beginning. The scene shifts. 2 centuries after the first cut in silver content, the cracks turned into chasms. By the mid-3rd century, during what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, approximately 235 to 284 AD, Rome's monetary system unraveled. Legions that once stood invincible now demanded to be paid in gold, or not at all. The trusty silver coins of old, they were suddenly worthless. In some cases, the silver content of common coins plunged to 5% or less of what they had been. Imagine, you're a Roman legionary, loyal to the state. You march, you fight, you live by your wages. But your wage, once enough to buy land or raise a family, now buys barely a loaf of bread. Merchants roll their eyes at the coin you hand them. You know you're being cheated. This wasn't just inflation, it was a betrayal of trust. Urban markets faltered. In remote provinces, farmers abandoned their lands rather than pay taxes in worthless coins. Barter re-emerged. Taxes soared. The state printed yet more coins with ever less metal inside. A vicious cycle. By the time the empire looked outward for threats, the real erosion was inside. The empire's capacity to respond militarily was paralyzed, not because of lacking men, but because the money behind the men no longer held value. And here's the chilling twist. Rome did not fall in one catastrophic moment. It faded, quietly and unevenly, because its money system, the very foundation, had been undermined by those sworn to protect it. But that's where the damage truly began. We often draw a line in history, ancient collapse versus modern stability. But what if the same pattern haunted both? Separated by millennia, yet identical in its destructive force. Take the Weimar Republic of early 1920s Germany. By July 1922, prices had already risen by some 700%. And within a year, the German Papiermark was worth 4.21 trillion to $1. In an instant, the money people trusted ceased to be money. Children sold sweets by the day because the coin lost value overnight. And then, much farther afield, Zimbabwe in 2008, one of the most extreme cases of hyperinflation in recorded history. By mid-November, the annual inflation rate was estimated at 89.7 sextillion%. Bread cost a wheelbarrow of bills. Savings vanished. Society's invisible glue, money, crumbled. Here's the hidden link. In Rome, currency was quietly degraded over decades. In Germany and Zimbabwe, the degradation sped up. But the dynamic is the same. Lose trust, lose money, lose order. The twist? It's never just about how much you print. It's about what happens when everyone realizes the currency is broken. In Rome, people hoarded older, heavier coins. In Germany, workers were paid twice a day because the dollar value of their wage halved by lunch. In Zimbabwe, a $1 million note might buy you a chicken. And in each scenario, the state spends, the money system staggers, the social contract phrase. These aren't isolated freak episodes, they're loops. 1. Empire debases currency for immediate gain. 2. Inflation erodes value. 3. The public loses faith. 4. Economy, military, society begin to falter. What Rome started centuries ago, Germany and Zimbabwe repeated under different flags, but under the same rule. So think of this as a warning, not only a history lesson. When money fails its promise of stability, civilization begins to unravel. And that leads us to the final unraveling, where the real collapse happens. The mightiest legions in history once marched under Rome's eagle standards, yet, at the end, they stood idle. Picture this: fields untended, tax collectors fleeing, troops demanding gold, and not from some barbarian horde, but from the very state they served. According to one estimate, by the late 3rd century, the old silver coinage of the Roman Empire had collapsed. The army, once Rome's pride, was paid in increasingly worthless pieces of metal. Here's the reversal. Strength no longer came from the sword or the shield. It came from the trust in a coin, and that trust had been shredded. The state still built walls, still wielded titles, still marshaled armies, but all of it rested on the foundation of a currency people believed in. When that foundation crumbled, every other pillar cracked. The empire's social contract, we defend you, you pay us tax, the money holds value, collapsed. Imagine being a Roman soldier. You've pledged your life, but your pay now buys less than half what it did a decade ago. You see merchants refuse your coins. You know your empire is still powerful, but your personal stake in it is evaporating. At the same time, farmers abandon land when taxes demand increasingly rare coin or grain in lieu. Society unravels at the edges. By the time the invasion of the Visigoths in 410 AD took place, the Western Empire wasn't just under attack, it was already hollow. According to one historian's tally, the Western state between 217 and 476 AD spent a majority of decades fighting internal conflicts or civil wars. The armies could still fight, but for what remained of faith in Rome? This is the twist. Military power without monetary credibility is powerless. The grand aqueducts, the legions, the bureaucratic machine, all were built for a system where money meant something. Once money didn't, the system's muscle became as brittle as the debased coin in the hand of a legionary. And the lesson echoes today. Empires don't fall because their enemies grow bigger. They fall when their foundation of trust dissolves. When money fails to do its job, nothing else holds. But what followed from this ruin caught everyone off guard. So here we are, centuries after the marble of the Roman Forum cracked, and after the silver in the denarius lost its shine. The cost wasn't measured in broken swords or shattered amphitheaters. It was measured in something quieter: lost trust. When a currency becomes hollow, the empire it supports becomes hollow too. And yet the story isn't locked in the past. Today, the world stands with public debt at levels unseen since the Second World War. The International Monetary Fund warns global borrowing could exceed 100% of GDP by 2029. The US debt to GDP ratio is approaching 140%. The message from Rome is clear. Prosperity anchored only in printed promises is a fragile base. Here's the twist. The fall of Rome didn't end in 476 AD. It echoes now. Because when money fails to be money, armies might still march, but they march for an empire that no longer holds value inside. A superpower economy, a dominant currency, open markets, all vulnerable if trust vanishes. So ask yourself this: what hidden financial fault line is eroding the foundation of our economy right now? Is it the ballooning debt? The faith in unlimited money printing? The belief that today's stimulus has no tomorrow's bill? Your turn. Drop your answer in the comments. The Empire of Rome wasn't defeated by swords, but by silent erosion. What will bring down ours?